Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. It is sunny today, my car is very hot, and I am in a great mood because I love summer and I love warm temperatures. So today I'm going to be reviewing Mesopotamian Myths. The top just says The Legendary Past, and this is by Henrietta McCall. So this book is pretty thin, as you can see. It's not a whole lot, but it gives a brief overview of the key myths that we have recreated from the Mesopotamian region of the world. So Babylonian myths, Assyrian myths, and I think they mentioned some of the Hittite translations of these myths as well. So one key thing to remember, which Henrietta McCall does touch on, is that these are only the myths that survive. So we might have a skewed view of how important some of these are, and we also don't know, because these myths do seem to be kind of stylized, we are not sure how or what kind of colloquial is not the right word. Like everyday people, what were the stories they were telling? Because they might not have been these same myths, as a lot of these myths seem to be highly ritualized, or they seem like they were meant to be repeated in front of a crowd on feast days or on specific days. So Henrietta McCall was kind of calling out, hey, this is what we've recovered, and these are the myths that we happen to have survived. So we might have a misrepresentation of the importance of these, and we also don't know if these are representative of the stories that the common people were telling themselves when they were just hanging out on a nice hot evening after working. So yeah, that's kind of a thing to keep in mind. So this one, after we have a brief introduction to that, we also have a chapter about the different gods and goddesses that are going to be mentioned, and kind of a discussion about the different characters that the people in this region would see in myths. So they would recognize like the common people, but like I say common people, like kings, but maybe kings that weren't divine, but they were important because they were historical. We have kind of semi-divine kings, so kings that had a god or goddess as a parent. We also have the gods, and there's quite a bit of fantastical creatures that also exist in these myths. There is a chapter devoted to Gilgamesh, which is a very popular myth. You probably learned about it in school if you covered the Mesopotamian region in school. There's also a chapter on the creation myth, and there's a lot of discussion about the parallels if you are familiar with the biblical stories of both of those. So Gilgamesh has some parallels to like the flood story in the Bible and the Epic of Creation. Well, most cultures have a creation myth, but they do discuss some of the parallels. And that is because, as again, the author calls out, a lot of the early interest in the Mesopotamian region was because these areas were mentioned in the Bible. So there was kind of that biblical layer that people were looking at the beginning, which kind of led to some of the interest in this region. Then the author moves on to some of the less common myths, and these are ones that I was not familiar with, and these were the ones that were kind of interesting. And I should also add that the author really does try to keep like a lot of the original content, as you can see here, in the way that it was stylized on the tablet. So she's not trying to like interpret this in her telling. She's just kind of giving some lines and then some explanations on what it means, which I thought was really good. But there was yeah, all sorts of myths that I had not heard of, such as Epic of Ara, Etana, Adapa, Epic of Anzu, Descent of Ishtar to the Underworld, and then Nergal and Ereshkigal. And if I remember correctly, this Ereshkigal is the goddess of the Underworld, and I thought her stuff was really cool. She seemed like a pretty cool character in this. Another thing that I just wanted to point out because I thought it was really funny was in this. It was in the Gilgamesh and the Flood chapter because there is a related myth, and that is the myth of Atrahasis, which is an Akkadian myth, but it also contains parts of the flood story, so they put it in the same chapter as Gilgamesh. And the myth begins with the gods, rather than men, having to do all the hard work, digging out canals and clearing channels, and they do not like it. After 3,600 years, they decide they have had enough and arm themselves to confront with Enlil, and they decide to make man after that. And basically, they get tired because the humans are making too much noise, which is what brings on the flood to kind of try to clean the earth. But I just like that after 3,600 years, they decided they were sick of doing all the work, and they decided maybe they were going to do something about it. I really enjoyed this. I think this is a good starting point if you want to start getting into the Mesopotamian myth. There's definitely a lot more detail that you could get. And also a thing to know is if you read this particular book, and I don't know if there's updated versions, but this is older, and that's just something that's unavoidable when you write a book. It will age. So there's probably more detailed or up-to-date information in newer books, but I definitely don't think this is a bad book. I really did wind up enjoying it, and I think that you might too if you want to get started on Mesopotamian myths. There's a lot more content here that you could dive into if you would like to go into it further, but it's a really good starting point, and it's pretty short, so you can really cover some of the basics in maybe an afternoon. Other than that, everyone, I hope you have a great day.